My friends, mashallah, and everybody here, thank you so much. And it's definitely an exciting time in this country with the revival of the Poor People's Campaign, inshallah. And myself coming from an interfaith world, being a Muslim in an interfaith world, most of the organizations that I work with and the multi-faith community that I live with, that I live in Stony Point Center, are geared towards nonviolence. And in particular, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, an organization that I'm with, is also the oldest interfaith organization that is particularly geared with the principles and practices in the study of nonviolence, because that is the common denominator to almost every conflict in this world, including eco-justice. And as a Muslim, we are also ecumenically challenged, and we do have our denominations, A to Z, Ahmadis to Zaydis. So I'm only going to speak from what I've eclectically studied. I do come from the Shia tradition, the southern Iraqi persuasion. So we do have, I follow Sayyid Ayatollah Sistani, who is one of our leaders, who is our leader from the major two schools of thought. But he has studied in the Sunni School of Thought, which is out of Egypt and out of Iran also. So one of the first things that I want to mention is one of my favorite sayings from the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He says, "Do not use anything in which there is a living soul as its target." Period. If anything that you use has a living soul as its target, do not use it. It is best to abstain from it. And one of the main things with regards to the Islamic text is the difference between the concepts of emotion and reason. And it is common in a lot of faith traditions, especially scriptures, that we have our text study. I believe the Vedas means knowledge, you know. We have Bible study, we have Torah study, people talk Torah, the rabbis all day, you know, famine down the sages, you know. And for us, the very first revelation that the Prophet Muhammad revealed that was revealed to from the angel Gabriel was the word read, Iqra. And that was revealed to him 3 times. And Iqra in Arabic means read, analyze, debate, argue, wonder, dialogue with respect. So basically that was said to him 3 times before God said, believe in me blindly, understand, use your mind and understand why you believe in me. So there is a difference. So it's very, very rare, at least in my school of thought, the Shia school of thought, that you hear about the concept of love a lot. You know, of course, one of the names of Allah is the loving, you know, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before we do anything or start anything, we say in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the compassionate, the gracious. But, you know, it's kind of funny how we have this dichotomy. The Sufis, mashallah, and I know in the Christian tradition, you will hear the concept of love, radical love. But I don't know, any imams, you know, like I can't imagine any Islamic conference with 6,000 people where the topic would be love, or the imam would just sit there and talk about love. I can't even imagine a Jewish conference maybe. It's very, very rare because for some reason we're stuck up here, you know. But you have to have a combination of both in Islam. So it is very important to learn, to attain knowledge and to decipher right from wrong, so that you have your own moral autonomy. And a lot of interpretations about the story of original sin is that we were born free from sin. And only once we attain knowledge and attain, you know, some sort of reason that we can decipher for ourselves and have our own moral autonomy, only then are we able to be judged whether we are sinning or not. You know, so that's basically one of the main underlying concepts of being violent or not. So that's something that is really pretty much embedded in a lot of the nonviolence. And the nonviolent strategies are definitely in different layers. First of all, eco-justice. You know, I have a Green Faith fellow here with me, mashallah, and most of the probably the main common denominator in almost all of the globe's injustices come from the violation of our Mother Earth to get her resources because of our ego. I mean, you know, I always say I'm from Iraq. If Iraq exported oranges, I mean, we wouldn't spend $2 trillion, you know, liberate, you know, for tangerines, you know what I mean? I mean, so it's just, So it's just going after the earth's resources, whether it's, cobalt in Africa or jade, or, in South America, going after the earth, and all of that destruction of the earth ultimately results in indigenous rights being violated, in African or people of color being violated to go after those resources. That results in climate change. I mean, Syria is a direct result of, the carbon emissions from the Iraqi war. I mean, children are born with 6 fingers right now in Iraq. The earth is, like, the migration crisis is a result of the drying climate in Syria right now. That leads to refugees, that leads to tornadoes, hurricanes, floods. When you have refugees, that leads to sex trafficking. People do not go to school. Epidemiological things happen. Water sanitation happen. I mean, it's endless. A refugee camp is basically the same parallel as a for-profit prison. I mean, it's basically parallel to mass incarceration. A refugee camp is designed to keep you there for years. So a lot of things come back to ecological justice. And one of the most compelling quotes from the Quran says, "Corruption has appeared on the land and in the sea because of what the hands of humans have wrought. This is in order that we give them a taste of the consequences of the misdeeds, that people will soon turn to the path of right guidance." So I always like to say our Mother Earth, as in the Hindu tradition, the earth is our mother, the universe is our family. Our mama is a hot mess, our mama is angry, and our mama is testifying against us all the time. And basically Allah says, corruption will happen because of what the hands of humans have wrought. And so that is a very, very direct correlation between violence towards the earth. Also, violence towards the inhabitants. When you do an act of war in Islam, there are specific verses that say you cannot desecrate, first of all, houses of worship. I mean, that's a given. You cannot desecrate synagogues, mosques, churches, and temples. But you cannot desecrate trees that provide fruit. You cannot desecrate communities of animals. The Prophet Muhammad says that each animal community has a family, ayai, that bows alike in adoration to its creator. Birds, when they're spreading their wings, they are believed to pray to God. Sunflowers, when it talks about it in the when they bow to a certain way, they're believed to bow to a creator. So any living thing worships its creator and cannot be violated from an act of aggression. And many other different things. For example, the concept of halal and kosher. The Prophet always said it is better to avoid meat and only eat it as a luxury or when necessary. So even the concept of killing an animal or sacrificing, the animal sacrifices its life so that you can have meat. The sanctity of the cow, the only substitute for mother's milk worldwide, as in the Hindu tradition, I mean, the largest chapter in the Quran is named the cow. Hello, so even just the kindness to animals and the way that you sacrifice its life, it has to be treated humanely throughout its whole life. One animal cannot be killed in front of another. It has to be in a time of comfort, a place of comfort. It's preferable to have it face towards Mecca, to be blessed upon, to have it with a very simple blade, suddenly, to not give it any anxiety. If a chicken is killed in front of another chicken, that causes anxiety and stress, and you can be accountable for that because you're causing an act of aggression. So many different things with regards to how you take care of the earth and how you take care of animals. An act of war should only be in times of self-defense. Really, you cannot be the aggressor in many, many different instances. Prophet Muhammad and the Quran have tons of verses that say, repel that which is evil, with that is better. It is much better to create an enemy into a friend, much better to turn an enemy into an ally. There's also different stages of violence. There's intellectual violence, not allowing somebody the right to education. There's gender violence. One of my favorite verses from the Quran, God says, I shall not lose sight of each of you who labors in my way, whether it be man or woman, for each of you is equal in the sight of me. So basically, God says that when we all meet our Maker, when we all get to the gates of heaven, we are all judged equally. I mean, a woman doesn't get 30 cents to every good deed for every, that a man does. So why on this earth are we paid, not judged equally? If God judges us equally on our deeds, there's economic violence. Prophet Muhammad says, pay your laborer before the sweat dries off his forehead. There's, concept of, personal relationships. There's violence in how you talk to people, or the respect between a man and a wife. In Islam, a marriage isn't exchanging vows. A marriage is a contract. You do this for me and I do this for you. I mean, again, this love thing is just, it's a contract. What have you done for me lately? You know what I mean? And that really, it's just like, it's a relationship and it's a partnership. There's also etiquette with regards to the tongue and to the speech. Sayyid Ayatollah Sistani, who is in Iraq right now, nobody's facing more dynamics with regards to inner violence and sectarian violence because of divide and conquer strategy than Iraq, unfortunately. And one of his main tactics is really the etiquette of speech as a form of nonviolence. And he has to deal every day. The man is 90 years old, sits on the floor, has been visited by Dalai Lama, and they have their own little circle, I think, and the Pope. And his main tool of nonviolence is thoughtful dialogue. And he has to deal with people that have, been radicalized, or that have formed mass executions, or this or that. But it is the eloquence and the art of talking. And their Imam Ali says that he suggests when you speak, try to have the throat of a camel, because the throat of a camel is long. And humanity sometimes, speaking is an interesting thing, because this is supposed to work first and then this, but sometimes it works simultaneously, you know what I mean? Or this happens first and then this happens, So he says try to have the tongue of the thing of a camel, because by the time it reaches your mouth, you'd have time to think and gestate it a little bit. And the concept of gossip in Islam is called backbiting. Eating the flesh of your brother. And there's a saying by Rabbi Hillel, one of my favorite sages from Judaism, and I always remember this. And he says, "For three things there is no place in this life and in the life after: murder, idolatry, and adultery. But slander is like all three of them combined." So we try to remember that, because basically wars are basically pissing contests between two leaders, and I don't need to give you an example right now between one and a tiny gentleman across the world. So that there's definitely nonviolence when it comes to speech. Perhaps the most important concept with regards to violence is the concept of jihad. Jihad is a personal struggle to attain your very, very best in any situation. And there's the outer struggle. All of our scriptures are roadmaps to justice, to finding balance and harmony within anything. And I say this all the time. Justice, anytime you can turn a wrong into a right, you are trying to fight for a jihad. Whether it's to feed everybody, whether it's to clothe everybody, whether it's to liberate the maggots, I don't care. Whether it's to just, fight for anytime you fight oppression or you liberate anything that is oppressed, you are waging a jihad. But the most important jihad is the internal jihad, where you liberate any internalized oppression and you fight for the liberation of your own soul. And if you don't fight for justice for yourself, you cannot even begin to work on the violence, countering the violence in the outside world. You have to fight for the balance and harmony inside here. Like, you gotta line your chi, or whatever, you gotta work on this balance first. And that is the hardest thing. Because if you don't work on your internal jihad, that leads to self-violence. I suffered from bulimia for 30 years. There's all kinds of self-harm. People can turn to different vices, negative talk. And that's the most insidious form of violence, I think, is self-violence. And it's the most subtle, it's the most secretive, and it's the most, I think, debilitating. And we tend to forget that. And I've heard that in all of our traditions is, you know, you start here, it's kind of like what is it, you think globally, act locally or something?
Yeah.
And I believe that in all the traditions. And also we have the concept of Sharia law with regards to direct action. And this is something that has really been an issue with regards to civil disobedience, because there's so many different ways that the traditions around the world engage in civil disobedience. You know, according to one of my direct orders, you know, it's like we have to obey the law of the land first. If there's no constitution, then we default to God's law. So, you know, risking arrest or shutting down a bridge or jumping a fence, you know, to some traditions, that's a sign of aggression. You know, and we're initiating violence. You know, if we do something like that, we're asking to be arrested or we're asking to break the law. Some other traditions, they answer to another calling. So it's very important to remember the difference in each tradition. I mean, Gandhi shut down India by staying at home and fasting. You know, an older man just saying, I'm not going to eat, that's it, live with it. And he shut down all of India. So it's really important to understand the jurisprudence and the interpretation. Again, we all have our own moral autonomy on what we decide. So every act of civil disobedience is subject to interpretation and is just as valid and is just as precious as another person's idea of what resistance means. And there are different ways. I mean, in the Shia tradition, we have like Khoei's theology of protest. You know, we have many different ways. We all think about disrupting the system in our own way, because resistance is holy and shaking up the system is holy. But there are many, many ways to skin a cat, if you will. And they're all just as valid. And sometimes you can do a plan of action, a plan of attack in the most unexpected ways. And that's the beauty of interfaith cooperation, I think. You know, the unexpected sometimes. I'm going to read you a couple more quotes here. Any damage or a damaging retaliation for a damage is forbidden. And then Prophet Muhammad says, whoever is kind to a creature of God is kind to himself. And the servants, this is one of my favorite. O servants of the compassionate, those are those who walk humbly upon the earth. And when the foolish, arrogant, unenlightened, or ignorant address them, they simply smile and say, Salam, Shalom, peace. And this one goes back to the concept of moral autonomy and reason. God has created man. God has taught him speech and intelligence. The sun and the moon follow courses exactly computed. The herbs and the trees both bow alike in adoration to their creator. And the firmament has he raised high, and he has set up the balance of justice in order that you may not transgress that due balance. For established weight with justice, and do not fall short of that balance. For it is God who has spread out the earth for all of his creatures. Surely these are signs for those who reflect. Thank you very much.